I remember I was working in a restaurant, and I had this little MG midget that I loved. And, I had drove to the restaurant, I left in the parking lot, went in to pick up my check for work, and I came back and the car was on fire because the electrical system overheated. And I just sat there and I watched the damn thing. And I said, oh, it's just a material object. And I walked away, and that was that, And it was like there was nothing, no reaction. There was nothing. Well, that's, it's true. It is a material object, and it isn't a big deal. But that's just symbolic of the way I treated virtually everything in my life. I would just turn it off and walk away. Turn it off and walk away. There was an on-off button in the brain. And the way of looking at the life did not make life, it didn't work in life. So my life was just one big control dynamic. I would sit there and try to control everything in my life, and it didn't work. And it was exhausting to go through this process. And so the lack of feeling that I learned in retrospect was basically what I inherited from my parents. My mother, my father, they both tried to control life. My father was an emotional creature, and my mother was not. So my father would externalize his pain and show it to the world, and there was an empathetic response from people, but my mother just totally operated out of her head. And so there was no connection. There was no connection with her kids. She did everything externally in the right way, but there was no internal guidance system, which is your map for life. You flow from life through your intuition. It's an internal guidance system. In the Bible, Christ says, the word shall be written upon the hearts of men. Well, it's a movement from external law to internal law. Internal law is perfect balance. It's intuition. It's correct choice. That's why we have juries in a courtroom. Is the function of a jury is the consciousness of the man to make the decision between right and wrong. The law is not a dry, static thing. It's a dynamic thing. The law is alive. So the fulfillment of the law is the birthing of consciousness in man, or the unification of the heart with the mind in order to balance energetically the world. So in the world at large, we're going through the choice point of, are we going to have this external New World Order kind of system, or are we going to have a society which is based on common sense? Are we going to have a society which are choices made by human beings, or are we going to have a society basically run by corporations? And that's the big drama and play with the world at large, and of course we go through our own internal plays in regards to relationships and functioning in the world in relation to ourselves. So to have fulfilled, for me, the quest has been, well, how do I open my heart up and allow myself to be vulnerable and yet not succumb to all the problems that happen with that? It's building up this internal strength and yet being like a child. Christ said you got to be like a child at the same time, and remain emotionally vulnerable and open to life, but protect myself at the same time. Because naivety is no defense. It's not going to protect you in the long time. And the journey of the fool is descending into the realm of the material plane, and he's naive, and then he starts to get beaten up, and that's the process of learning. We start getting beaten up, and we can react by shutting down and attacking, or we can go the path of internal self-examination and begin resolving the conflicts internally within ourselves, and then hopefully create a balance or a consciousness. So the thing that I have today, we cycle back, let's say fast forward, it's 20 years later, and now I'm going through a lot of the same things that I went through 20 years ago in terms of relationships. I meet a girl that's almost the mirror opposite of me, who is cut off from her feelings, who is attempting to create the world from her mind, has a strong sense of integrity, okay? Same thing, representation of, like my mother, representation of a girl that I fell in love with when I was young. But what do you do here? What do you do? How do you change or operate within that construct. And so the first thing you think is, oh, just run away, move on, and find the next one, or go to the next level. That does not work. You run away, and you just end up back in the same place. So what I found is, through sitting through this stuff, the machine, the energy technologies, it's just it's like putting a big magnifying glass on your life. It's like you got nowhere to run. If you stick around, you got nowhere to run. You have to confront yourself, your own ego, and then you got to move through it. And what I found is the resolution process is pretty interesting, because if you kind of sit with this stuff long enough, you sit with the feelings, and you literally ask for guidance, you ask for help. That's a typical, quest by connecting with your higher power or God. And you do those things, there is a resolution which everything dissolves into harmony. So it's sort of like the negative all of a sudden links with the positive, and then there's balance, and then the thing evaporates. It's an evaporation process. So what I'm noticing is I'm going into these conflicts, and I think the same thing's going to repeat itself, and here we go again. And what's happening now, because they're of high energy states, is the blocks are just dissolving. And you just kind of walk through the wall, and you're on the other side. And this never happened before. I would hit the wall, and I would hurt myself. And then I would hit the wall again, and I would hurt myself. Because behind that wall were hundreds, if not thousands, of years of belief systems of people basically doing the same thing over again and falling down. Okay? We're all connected. So you have these walls are belief systems, and these belief systems are mine, but they're also other people. Okay? So it's just one big mess. And so we're trying to break through this big mess energetically, and it's really difficult to get through these certain stages. But as you walk through the stuff, and as you tread the path, things become lighter, because we have an advantage today that we've never had before. We used to have to go into mountains, eat really pure diets, and to dedicate totally our lives to spirituality to make any sort of spiritual progress at all. Today, we actually don't have to do that today. Today we have time acceleration through the Mayan calendar stuff, and today we also have technology. Okay? So technology can amplify any spiritual path you're on, and it can push you through these metaphorical or these belief systems which are lay in opposition to our lives. So this ego is linked into the ego of man, I'll call it. It's one big egoic attack that we're all participating within this construct. And there's just no way around it except through it. And that takes, the fulcrum is courage. If you have the courage to look at yourself, to accept the flaws, and to let go of them, it's really an act of forgiveness, then it just all dissolves. When you fight yourself, it just gets stronger. There's no way around it. I had a guy the other day who actually called me up and apologized from the depths of his heart. That's the first time in my life I had any guy ever do that to me, or anyone in my life. I said, wow, this is like going to the confessional. And he sort of dumped, and then it was just okay. I said, no problem, no big deal. That's great. Go on your merry way. It was, but it really is that simple. If it comes from the depths of your soul and you understand that this thing that you've done or you're doing just does not work in life, you just let it go. You accept it and you let it go. You don't put a mask over it. You don't try to cover it up with makeup. You just let it go. And that takes a great act of courage to be vulnerable emotionally in front of another human being. Tremendous act of courage. Fast forward again, it's like my father's now in a mental hospital. He was in the hospital for 10 years. And so the whole family had abandoned him because he was such a lunatic that no one wanted to deal with him, including me. And so he would call me up. I was the only phone number that he had. And so he would call me up periodically. And he would sit there and he would cry on the phone. And he would say, get me out of here, help me. He would say, why does no one love me? All these things.